everybody, and welcome to One Sustainability. One Sustainability features entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders who have sustainability as a core component of their overall strategy, presenting on cutting-edge topics and the latest industry developments. Our goal is to educate and inform the global business and entrepreneurial communities on the importance of sustainability and to promote and support sustainable business growth all around the world. Today, we're very happy to welcome leading environmental and water investor, advisor, and thought leader, Jud Hill. Jud Hill is the managing partner of Ecological Service Partners. Ecological Service Partners was established to capitalize on opportunities in environmental services and water-related investments. Supported by $250 million of committed equity, ESP is one of the best capitalized operators in the environmental services market. Jud has over 35 years of experience as an operator and private equity investor across the water resources, environmental services, and energy sectors. Jud has an established and successful investment track as a private equity professional, having served as a managing director over the last 15 years with the Texas Pacific Group, the Halifax Group, and NGP Energy Capital Management. Prior to that, he was a managing director with HSBC, where he oversaw the firm's water and industrial services investment banking practice. Early in Jud's career, he served in executive management positions with Atlantic Richfield and Westinghouse Environmental Services. Jud, it is really a great pleasure and an honor to have you here with us today to hear more about how to obtain top quartile PE returns while investing in sustainability and ESG. Thank you and welcome to One Sustainability.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that introduction. It's interesting as we all talk about sustainability. It's hard to put a defined set of terms to it. It's, a lot of subjective analysis goes into what is sustainable, what is not, how you define it. And I'm not going to sit here and try to figure that out, but I think it's useful for folks to understand sustainability has a broad definition, and it all translates to how to be more gentle on the planet, how to be a good steward of resources, how to reduce our carbon footprint. It's very inclusive, but it's interesting how this has evolved over the last 15 years or so. I know when I was with Natural Gas Partners, we were a very early player in this whole ESG sustainability space. And it's amazing. Back then, we could ask, the partners, what's ESG stand for? And many didn't know, because it was in its infancy and it was evolving and getting defined. And the real driver has really come up in the last even 5 years, where limited partners, into the private equity firms, into the GPs, the pension funds, the endowments, the family offices are very, very focused on making sure their dollars are invested in the sustainability space. And it's not just a casual, this is good for a year or two. I think it's here for a long time. It's here to stay. And there's been lots of capital raised over the last 5 years. I think there's an excess of $3 trillion of dry powder globally in private equity looking to invest in sustainability. That's a lot of money. The challenge therein lies, how do you look at deal flow? That's a lot of money chasing a kind of evolving definition of sustainability. And the other dynamic of that is there's a lot of very talented private equity folks. They know how to structure deals, negotiate deals, manage deals. But I argue that in the sustainability space, it takes, I believe, deep domain expertise, by the partners in the private equity fund, be it in water or energy or farming, but to have real technical and operating experience. You can do it through advisors as well, but you really need that edge, that angle, if you're going to invest in the space. Because in most cases, private equity, looks to partner with the existing, management team and enterprise that they're going to, try to invest and grow. And if you're going to do that, in most cases, private equity firms will take a majority position, and the current management team, they would take a minority position. Who knows what the ratio is? But you're really partnering with that management team, and you're going to partner for 5, 6, 7 years. So it's very much a relationship-driven business. And if they don't believe you're a knowledgeable party that has capital and domain expertise, you're going to get outcompeted by another private equity firm. Because I always argue that yes, a term sheet matters, the structure matters, the valuation matters, but what matters, I think, just as importantly, is the compatibility of the management team and the private equity guys, and making sure that there's a relationship there of trust and confidence. And it's said, but it's not really emphasized as much as it should be, that this is a people business. But so in any event, so now we have, the Carlyles, the TPGs, the Apollos, the Blackstones, they all have dedicated funds, looking for sustainability, and they're deploying that capital. And I argue one of the challenges is that we have very large funds, $1 billion, $2 billion. The equity checks that you're right have got to be of size, at least 100 million or even $250 million in some cases. And so you're wondering what happens to the smaller guys that are, doing 5, 10 million bucks of EBITDA and are in the sustainability space. And sometimes it's hard to find a capital partner that does lower middle market investing and has domain expertise. The money's there, but it's always a challenge to find the match. I give you an example. Probably 10, 12 years ago, when I was at Natural Gas Partners, to the founder's credit, a guy named Ken Hirsch, NGP is a very successful, midstream oil and gas firm, been around, 30 years. And I think, 10, 12 years ago, they said, what else is important globally besides energy? And, after a year of thinking and thought, 7 billion people on the planet, what's critical to life and sustainability, and concluded, maybe not surprisingly, that obviously energy is. And then they said water is obviously critical. It's a need, not a want. And agriculture, food supply, and actually coastal protection relative to sea level rise, and how do you harden the ports? How do you manage, the ecosystem around all continents to make sure that they're sustainable and hardy to take storms, et cetera, which are increasing. And so it was a four-legged stool. What was unique about that, it was called Global Adaptation Partners. But in essence, it was ESG sustainability driven. But having that four-legged stool of energy, water, ag, and coastal protection, and folks that have deep domain expertise, in those verticals. I was hired as the water guy. We had a guy from Archie-Daniels ADM, Archie-Daniels Midland, to be the ag guy, an ex-Corps of Engineer guy. But anyway, we had really deep expertise in those verticals, and looked for opportunities where those verticals intersect. And I'll go through a couple of examples with you in a few minutes. But that was really, I think, one of the first early entrants into the whole sustainability ESG. We went out to raise $3 billion and had $1 billion soft circled. But again, back in that day, energy was powerful. LPs, weren't as conscious as they are today, but they were, concerned that maybe NGP might get defocused, from their energy skills and do things that, aren't core. So we became part of the next fund, NGP 10, and it went fine, but we didn't have enough money to really, roll this out the way we were, which is fine. No one's bigger than the market. But anyway, that's an example of, trying to figure out ways to enter the sustainability marketplace. And also, we spent a year trying to define what is sustainability, and then how do we meet it. And a lot of those principles were, trying to find those investments, which, met the basic terms. Are you able to recycle, reuse, and or use less, and do it ideally in a way that you create an annuitized investment. So you're selling, water that's recyclable, or you're selling, frack water recycling, which is again an annuity, rather than trying to invest in, a capital market good, such as a device that might help sustainability. Not that those are bad, but ideally you're trying to find investments that have a yield to them from their balance sheet model, because that has a much more value on the exit if you have an annuitized business than just trying to sell margin on cost of goods. So that was a great entree. And then again, in the last 5 years, all the big guys have gotten into the business. The question always comes up too, well, if you're going to invest in sustainability, there's a perception that, okay, you really can't chase the real high margin, high yielding, high return type investments, which historically might have been, oil and gas, or, other things that may not be as clean as they should be relative to a carbon footprint or recycling or whatever your definition might be. And I have argued for, 20 years that you can be in the sustainability business and doing well by doing good, as we say, and also be able to generate top quartile returns for your limited partners. And a lot of folks say that, but there's, a lot of folks don't have any evidence to prove it. Well, over the last, 15 years, we've done a variety of investments to actually prove up, that principle, with proven exits too. I'll give you, a couple of examples. When I was at NGP, we actually did a de novo startup of a platform that said, let's go find agricultural land that has very senior water rights. And the way senior water rights work is first in use, first in right in the Western US. So if I have 1880 water and you had 1950 water, for example, in terms of the priority, I get all my water in a drought. You may get half or third or none of your water. You could argue that's not fair, but that's the way it works. So if you can find very senior water on a piece of farm property and pay ag prices, which we did this in Arizona, and we bought a whole lot of acres. And when we bought the property, we did something with somewhat atypical. We actually invested CapEx into the farm, where we did things like laser leveling, drip irrigation, micro irrigation. And our vision was, we're entitled to use, so many acre feet per acre under our entitlement. It's actually 3 acre feet per acre. And we thought, we could probably farm efficiently and profitably with probably 1/3 of the water we're entitled to take. Okay, let's do that. And let's take the other 2/3 and just put it aside for a moment. So we did that, put the CapEx in, laser leveled, got rid of the low spots, and then put the water on the farm, particularly, row crops, not so much, hay and those kind of things, but, more high produce related crops. And then found out that we could do drip or micro. And surprisingly, we found out that our yields actually improved a little bit, because if you think about it, we were feeding the plant, fertilizer when it was hungry, and we kind of fed it the water when it was thirsty, rather than have some of the plants sitting in water half the time being wet. And or historically, when you overwater that acreage and you're putting on your fertilizers, potassium, nitrate, potash, etc., which are very expensive. In many cases, half of those fertilizers actually leave the farm and are washed away into the receiving stream or the estuary, etc. And guess what happens? Fertilizer still works. So you have algal blooms, fish kills. It just destroys the ecosystem. What we found was that our inputs went down. We used less fertilizer. And guess what? The runoff that came off the property was dramatically less. And we didn't have things such as eutrophication, all the fish kills in the receiving stream. So the environment won, we won as smart investors, And the other 2/3 of the water we still own, we still have the right to use. And out west, it's very hard to find water rights that have not been, obligated to somebody. The old saying, location, location, location. That's true. But out west, it really is water, water, water. If you don't have access to a 100-year assured water supply, you can't build. You can't build a chip plant or build a new development, for the workers, etc., unless you have an assured water supply. So here we are with a lot of acreage, with water we don't, quote unquote, need to farm. We then can wholesale that water to local community and be able to, give them the critical water they need. So we're good partners, and this all works because everybody's winning. The community, the NGOs, the environment, our investors, nobody loses in the equation. And so now we have a good, reliable water source. And that truly is what is sustainable. And a good example of that is that, a lot of people, when you're in the water business, oh, you're one of those private equity guys, you're going to raise the price, and, do those horrible things. And we say, no, that's not the case. And we prove why. And one example was a couple counties over in Arizona, the actual water supply was owned by the community or town. And there was a severe drought going on. The geologist went into the mayor and said, hey, Mr. Mayor, we got a problem. If we keep pumping in this aquifer, keep everybody's grass green, two things can happen. We're gonna have saltwater intrusion, or the aquifer just may collapse, giant sinkhole. And of course, the mayor said, how sure are you? He goes, we're not. It's not an exact science, but the risk is growing up dramatically that if we keep pumping this hard to keep everybody's grass green, we got a problem. Well, he said, keep on pumping. They had problems. In that same circumstance, we'd say, sorry, folks, your grass is going to go brown because we care about this resource for the next, 100 years, because that's what we do. That's our asset. It's just not something we may have that we get to manage as a mayor for 4 years. So we have a much longer term vision about how to be stewards of that asset. And that changes the dynamic with the community and the NGOs and how we operate. That's a great example of sustainability. So you're helping agriculture, you're being a better steward of water, and that's something that has a rollout capability that could, it's going to happen throughout the whole Western U.S. because water, is essentially free. Water is almost a free good, and the price of water, is starting to increase. People are beginning to use water in a more economical way. So that whole water ag space is a great way to invest in. And in that case, in terms of returns, sustainability, we probably made 2.5 times our money and probably a 30 to 40% IRR with modest leverage. That's top quartile returns for sustainability investment. Another example is what's called wetland mitigation banks. I have a fund now that we actually invest in properties that have been impacted by storm or poor ag practices that are, in the coastal zone of the U.S. and they don't function well as wetlands. So we go in and purchase the property, and we submit a permit to the Corps of Engineers explaining how we're going to improve that property and make it more of a functioning estuary and put the flora and fauna back where it was, get the sinuosity of the streams, get the flux rate right with the tides, and put that wetland back where it was 100 years ago before man messed with it. And when we do that, the Corps says, you did your job, here's a bunch of credits, and they go on what's called the Corps ledger. So they're there for sale. And once they're on the ledger, parties that are impacting jurisdictional wetlands, which are everywhere, if you're building an LNG plant or a pipeline, or you're expanding a port, you're likely to impact wetlands. If you do that, before you start building, you must mitigate the impact that you're going to have on jurisdictional wetlands. What do? They come to us and buy our credits. And we know, looking at the building schedules and the FERC permits, et cetera, who's going to need what type of credit when. And we try to structure how we restore this wetland to meet the upcoming needs of impacting parties. So, and in many cases, if you're building a $1 billion LNG plant and you can't begin construction until you solve the problem of mitigation, they looked at us and say, hey, you got the types of credits we need. They're going to be available when we need them. We like to buy them. And the last thing they ask about is price. They care about schedule, they care about quality, they care about our balance sheet, and price is not really, a high priority. So you love to be in a business where the third and fourth question is price. And you build $1 billion, LNG plant, and let's pick a number. I sell my credits for $10 million that party needed. It may only cost me $2 million of investment in CapEx to create those credits. That's a pretty good return. And when we're done storing a wetland, we put a conservation easement over top of it, and it in essence becomes a small little, protected park, for bird watching and estuaries, et cetera. And we'll give it to an NGO to manage over that, 50 or even 100-year conservation easement period. So here we are restoring wetlands, which are critical in hurricanes. They're the sponge, if you will, that takes that impact, and doing a restoration to help the environment and the flora and fauna, and actually filter out some of the ag runoff, because all that ag runoff still occurring, coming down the rivers and streams, et cetera. And the wetlands, basically suck up those nutrients before they get out into, the water column and cause algal blooms, et cetera. So it's really a nature's ecosystem that we restore. So nothing's more sustainable than that. So we restore a wetland, we make great money, and we make top quartile returns. And we underwrite our deals to a 25%, IRR, which is top quartile, which a lot of folks say they do, but they don't get there. Usually less than that, and 2 to 2.5 times, cash on cash return to capital. Because the clock matters, IRRs matter. So again, another example, and that's a huge issue right across the whole United States, particularly if an infrastructure bill goes through of some consequence, who knows when. But it will include, how do we harden our ports? How do we deal with sea level rise? How do we deal with, a variety of issues on our coast? That kind of investment strategy is key. So that's another example that we did. Another example is, people debate fracking, good, bad, or indifferent, but right now we need it, and 2/3, 80% of all of our energy needs are met by, the fracking industry. I won't get into why fracking is good. It's, I think, relatively obvious. You make one penetration of the ground, go down 2 miles, and you build, in essence, a giant radiator, 1 mile by 1 mile, fracture the shale, extract the hydrocarbons, bring it to the surface. And that's a much more efficient way to get hydrocarbons out of the ground than making 100 penetrations, piercing the aquifer and looking for, pools of oil, wherever they may be, and then, try and just extract the oil. But obviously when you frack, fracking is done with water. So water doesn't compress. So once you build your, radiator underground, if you will, again, it's 2 miles deep, remember, it's real deep. You fracture that water comes back up. That water is pretty nasty. They've added a whole lot of chemicals to it to enhance the, the fracking process and the yields of hydrocarbons. But when that water comes to the surface, and there's a bunch of it, how do you manage it? And historically, they've taken that frack water and taken it to another well nearby and put it right back down the hole, not 2 miles deep. And those are called, saltwater injection wells. And there's a lot of pressure to say, let's not do that. Let's actually reuse that water, which we had done, developing a series of, technologies and processes. So when that water comes to the surface, we can process it, with appropriate, again, this is not high tech. It's just putting these things in a functional treatment train. You can get rid of the total dissolved solids, the chemicals, et cetera, and make relatively clean water and put that water back down the hole again. So again, recycle, reuse of water, reducing, the water that will be coming from other sources, lakes, streams, et cetera, to do the fracking. But now we close the loop. I'll get another maybe game-changing idea that I've been working on with a partner of mine. And it's got a ways to go, but if we're right, it could be very significant and disruptive. Fracking has about $1 trillion invested now in underground infrastructure, to build that radiator, if you will, 2 miles deep. And it probably takes 10 years to extract the hydrocarbons. And when you're done, you put a cap on it and move away, and go on to the next one. Well, over time, there's a lot of wells that are no longer economic and are closed, and they just sit there. Well, our thought was, why can't we just put water back down that well and heat the water? And water down there is probably 300 degrees Fahrenheit, 250. Heat the water, bring it back to the surface, and put it through a geothermal system. The reason that makes sense now is classic Moore's law. 5 or 6 years ago, geothermal systems weren't efficient enough to do a direct conversion of 150, 200 degrees C water to energy. It didn't make it. We didn't have the technology to do it that was cost effective. We do. The Icelanders have systems, and they're mobile, they're modular, and so now that exists. Didn't exist 5 years ago. So if this should work as we hope it does, it could be a game changer. And one of our engineers said, what are you using water for? Water's heavy. You got to put it back to the surface. It's not under pressure. So you lose probably 20% of your energy that you're generating to actually pump water 2 miles deep to the surface to extract the heat from the water. Oh, okay. Well, why not use CO2? And CO2 is compressible. It carries more heat per unit volume than water does. And start recycling the CO2 and be able to have a more efficient energy machine now that we've converted it to a geothermal system. One of the guys said, well, when you do that, you're going to lose a lot of CO2 back down in the formation. And he said, well, that could be a good thing. So if we lost half our CO2 back in the formation, it's classic carbon sequestration, right? So we're putting the CO2 back where it came from. And we have models to show that, should this work the way we think it does, that when you use CO2 as your heat transfer vehicle, we think we can sequester in that formation as much CO2 that was ever liberated when those hydrocarbons were burned, right? So now we've put that total closed loop, totally sustainable, put it back in the ground, and now we have something that's much better than using classic hydrocarbons and worrying about CO2 footprint, fugitive emissions, et cetera, et cetera. And plus, that strategy allows you to reduce the amount of energy from diesel generators that are used on these frac sites, which is very expensive and very inefficient. And so that geothermal system can be used to run all the energy. And every big oil company now is focused to figure out how to reduce the carbon footprint, even transition away from hydrocarbons. You get to the sustainability model. Every major, Exxon, Mobil's, all of them, are not just saying it, they're doing it. Matter of fact, my old firm, Natural Gas Partners, is now rebranding themselves to Energy Transition Partners, looking more to renewables, et cetera. So this is a major sea change. I don't believe it's just a bubble or a fad. I think we're going to restructure, rethink, and reconfigure how we do sustainability. Now, an example I just discussed, just mentioned, which is, basically, geothermal using a frac formation. The margins on that are amazing, and their yields on invested capital are pretty amazing. And we do well by doing good. We're finding a way to create energy, via geothermal. And the real advantage, which people don't talk about, we talk about wind and solar, aren't they great? Yep, they are. But we have no way to store that energy when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining. Well, this geothermal strategy runs 24/7, doesn't care if it's wind's blowing or rain's blowing. It's a radiator that you're recycling and getting energy from. I mean, those are game-changing solutions that, if proven and it works, even half as well as we think it does, that could make a huge change on the U.S. energy, methodology that we have. So, that's another example. Again, all these are really looking for ways to do all by doing good, do sustainability, and try to find ways that have annuitized revenue. Because ironically, every private equity investor invests their capital, tries to do the right thing and grow that asset, by acquisition or just, building the base business and attracting efficiencies. And then after 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years, they have to exit. They got to monetize that investment. Well, you think, okay, who do I exit to? Well, ironically, some of the exit these days can actually be back to the actual LP, like a big pension fund or endowment that's actually looking for assets that have yield that can be used to as a cash flow method to fund all their pensioners, which are as hundreds and millions and millions of people, and they need an annuity type revenue. So if you could present to an LP, let's use a water example, we can have where we own the water and we're selling it, it's recyclable and it's sustainable, and that's an asset that not going to change. No one's going to displace water or have a water substitution solution. It's going to be water. That's something that a large pension fund may wish to acquire and actually own it and get the yield off those assets. Another maybe quick water example of sustainability is actually looking at how you store water and manage these water rights in a fashion where when you look at water as a whole collective strategy. When it rains and the rain's coming by the farm, how do you collect that water? Put it in some geology where you can store it and maintain it and treat it, and then be able to wheel it or move it from one place to another, so you're more efficiently spreading this water where it's needed, and being able to manage the water rights accordingly. And if you manage that whole water ecosystem together through an investment strategy, it becomes a very powerful yielding machine, and a very effective way to do good water stewardship. Again, I mentioned I can go on and on, but these are investments that I actually did. I didn't think about and think that could work and prove up that you definitely can generate top quartile returns doing sustainable impact investing. So again, I think this is something that's going to be, I think we're in the first inning, maybe the first pitch of this whole sustainability investment strategy. I think it's going to go on for decades as we try to figure out how to be more gentle on our planet and do things that are more efficient and effective. The challenge always becomes price. Another example, which we've looked at, is you look at all the big poultry farms or the big hog farms, the Purdue's, the Smithfields. It's a crime, to be candid, that when they in many cases like chickens, the Purdue's of the world and many others will farm out those to small little local farmers. Like I live in Delmarva, or in the Chesapeake Bay area, and the Delmarva Peninsula is huge, and there's just hundreds and hundreds of farmers, small farmers that actually will grow the chicken. So the big guy would just say, here's the chick, here's the hormones, here's the water, here's the feed. They tool those out to them and say, we'll come back in, I don't know how long it takes, a couple of months when the chicken's full grown. We'll take the chicken and then we'll release the loan. We loaned you to grow the chicken, and we'll pay you, I don't know, 10-15% margin for your profit. However, all that chicken manure that happens to be out in that back pond is yours. We didn't buy that. And so the farmer doesn't make a lot of money. And of course the regulators say, hey, that big pond out there in the back acre, is just putting all kind of nitrogen and other fertilizers, if you will, into the ecosystem, into the stream. And it's killing the fish and the algal blooms, and we got all this plant growth. It's a mess. You better clean it up, Mr. Farmer. And that guy says, there's no way I can afford to do that. I can't spend a couple $1,000,000. And so it goes on, and they call their legislator, whomever, and say, hey guys, back off of this guy. He can't afford it. And so it isolates the problem. And so those are called CAFOs, centralized animal feeding operations. And so what we're trying to do is figure out ways to make, the big guys pay attention that they should be responsible for that waste as well, and do it in a way that, is cost effective. And I think it's only, I don't know, 5 cents a pound. We ran the numbers. If you did that, there's enough money there to actually really do appropriate stewardship of all that, chicken manure and hog manure, to do it the right way. Even recycle some of that as to actual fertilizers. And there's systems that exist, which we've invested in a few, that will take that waste, dry it, pelletize it, recycle it, and reuse it. But again, it's all driven by, will the market pay the price to invest, to generate, those pellets? And they're more than just conventional ways. So, the economic dynamic, is changing. I think there's enough pressures now to really do things sustainability, because, shareholders now, it's not just, the board of directors that are sitting there, but a lot of shareholders that invest in these large public companies are putting lots of pressure and say, don't just tell us you're going to do the right thing, do the right thing. So I'm a big fan of where this is going. I've been at it for 35, 40 years, and I think again, I think we're in the first inning. So with that, I'll hopefully that's helpful to folks. And if you're looking for a career or what to look to do in life, that you can make a great living, but also do all by doing good, this is the right place. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much, Judd. This is such an interesting and broad explanation of this movement that so many people are talking about, but that we don't fully understand. When you started saying that 20 years ago you were getting involved, I remember that I as well, 20 years ago, started getting involved in sustainability. In those days, we used to call it corporate social responsibility. Nobody talked about ESG. I don't think it even existed then, at least where I was in Europe, we didn't know, and I was working in the automotive industry. But what helped us take off was an understanding that there were climate issues, that there were issues created by the car industry that needed to be addressed. However, it was never huge. It was taking off in such a way. This is when the hybrid car came out and so on and so forth. And you said that it really took off about 5 years ago. Now, what explains it? Is it all of a sudden people are aware of the huge climate threats and the changes and what could possibly happen? What do you think enabled this to really take off in a big way? I find this interesting.
That's a great question. I don't have a definitive answer. I just do think it's just classic momentum. There was so much discussion and debate about global warming, and now the debate isn't so much, is there global warming? Yes, there is. The debate is more, how much did man's contribution, start to change the environment? Is it 10%? Is it half? We're not sure. But I think there was enough people that are looking at that carbon footprint, and moreover, just issues relative to, we got finite resources like water, and like oil and gas, and all the things that they may generate that are going to impact our environment. I think the pension funds and the endowments, the guys that have the real money, for a private equity fund, that's the customer. Folks that have all the money, and you're always looking to raise money to invest. So I think to your point, though, I think the Europeans have led the way in this whole strategy. They're definitely ahead of the United States, and I think U.S. will catch up. It's a pretty powerful machine, but all these things have a gestation period, and I really think that it's not just casual conversation now. Every boardroom on the agenda has ESG, sustainability, and how we're reporting those metrics back to our investors, and not just saying fun, wonderful, glowing words of what we're thinking about doing.
Yeah. And not just for greenwashing. I mean, to really take it seriously.
Right.
And I think that's that's a key issue. You know, a lot of companies, when they talk about this, they start by trying to get a sense of purpose. What is their purpose, and build everything around that, and building in all the ESG issues where they need to be. So I think this is great, and I'm so glad that investors are taking it seriously.
Just one more thought on that, which I think is part of the evolution. This goes back to my days at Westinghouse Environmental, in that, you know, everyone looked at investing in managing your environmental issues or sustainability, et cetera, even 30, 40 years ago, as a cost item on your balance sheet and your P&L. It's like, I don't want to do it. It's going to reduce my margins, et cetera. I think the thinking has evolved now that said, wait a minute, we can do the right thing and actually have technologies and solutions and strategies that, you know, all of a sudden reduce our cost of goods and actually have solutions that are marketable that can make money. So you turn on its head that it's no longer a cost item, it's a profit item. And I'll give you a real quick example. You know, back in the day at Westinghouse, you know, we realized that, you know, we were putting, I think it was, you know, nickel as a catalyst into something we were making. And nickel was just totally screwing up our wastewater treatment system, and it's costing a fortune to get it out. And, you know, the permits, you know, didn't allow for it. It just created havoc. And so we went upstream to the engineers and said, how come you guys are using nickel? You know, why don't you use another, you know, it's like a penny cheaper than the other catalyst, you know, whatever that might have been, I don't know. And they said, yeah, we can change, it's no big deal. And so we save, you know, it'll cost us, you know, $1, you know, here to use some alternative to nickel. And rather than spend $100 at the back end of the system, you know, we had to take it out of the wastewater. And it, you know, it's that kind of holistic thinking that now I think is embedded to how, you know, companies think and operate.
Yes, there's no doubt about that. And also even moving to more environmentally friendly things like electric battery cars, you have to have huge sources of metals such as cobalt and lithium. Correct. And extracting them creates a lot of environmental problems. So the whole thing, you're so right, the whole thing has to be seen together.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, just as a footnote to that, I do find it troubling. My buddies buy Teslas and other electric cars and think, you know, they have a zero carbon footprint. And you have to explain to them that, guess what, particularly where I live in the Northeast, you know, that electricity had to come somewhere. Well, guess where it came from, at least around here, a coal-fired power plant. So, you know, we're using coal-fired power plants to, you know, power up our electric cars. And there's a perception is they have a zero carbon footprint, which is wrong.
I know. Well, this is great. We could go on for a long time. I want to thank you once again for your time, for your insights. These are issues that we all need to take a lot more seriously, and I hope we're moving strongly in the right direction. We'll work on the video and make it available to everybody to be able to see it and watch it. And we would like to thank you once again very much for your support. This is
sure
terrific.
And I appreciate too that, you know, I'm sure what I say may not be perfect. I can take criticism that says, you know, do more of this, do less of that, you know, speak louder, speak softer. So feel free to, you know, give me input.
Well, it's an ongoing discussion, so there will be to's and fro's, and this is all very helpful. And thank you very much again.
Great. All right, guys.
All right.
Talk soon.
Talk soon.
Right.
Bye-bye.
See you.